Welcome to the deep dive. If you've ever really gotten lost in making a game, the coding, the graphics, the sound, just that whole creative buzz, you know how amazing that feels.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real passion. That initial spark is fantastic.
The-
But then comes the tricky part, right? How do you actually get that game you poured your heart into out there so other people can play it, not just you?
Yeah, that jump from making it to sharing it, that's where things can get a bit frustrating.
Totally. Because the whole distribution thing, it sounds simple, but it's actually, well, pretty complex sometimes.
Right, like it runs perfectly fine on your computer, then your friend tries it, and bam, no Python, wrong version, missing some library you didn't even think about.
Exactly. And okay, you could send the source mode, maybe a requirements.txt, but honestly, most people just want to click and play. They don't want to, debug environments,
No kidding. So then you think, okay, executables, I'll just bundle it all up.
which sounds great. And it is if everyone's on the same system, like Windows to Windows.
But if you're on a Mac trying to share with a Windows user or
Yeah.
thinking about mobile, Android, iOS,
And then you're suddenly juggling virtual machines, cross-compilers, maybe even different physical machines just to build for each platform. It's a lot.
yeah, it sounds like a nightmare of just environments clashing. So if we want to skip all that pain, what's the solution we're diving into today?
So our mission here is to look at this really, really cool tool called Pygbag. It's designed specifically for games made with Pygame CE.
Game CE, that's the community edition, right? The modern, updated version of Pygame.
That's the one. Actively maintained, lots of new features. And Pygbag basically takes your Pygame CE game and turns it into a web application, something that just runs in a browser.
Wait, so instead of installs and executables, you just send someone a link, a URL.
Pretty much. That's the core idea, a web link.
That sounds potentially revolutionary.
Yeah.
For getting your game out there, reaching anyone on almost any device.
That's exactly the promise. Pygbag aims to cut through all those traditional distribution headaches. No Python worries for the player, no OS-specific builds for you. Just share the link, and they can play.
Okay, let's dig into that. Pygbag, it's a Python package, you said. Converts Pygame CE games to web apps, even progressive web apps, PWAs. What makes the web itself so good for this?
Well, the biggest thing is that universal reach. Think about it. Almost every device has a modern web browser. Desktops, laptops, tablets, phones, Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux.
Mm-hmm.
So your game just works across all of them, basically, which massively simplifies distribution, like you said. No more separate build.
And it handles mobile stuff, too, touch screens and all that.
Yep. It supports touchscreens. Taps work like clicks. It can even handle accelerometer and gyroscope data plus external joysticks if someone plugs one in. So mobile-friendly right out of the box.
Wow, okay. That's compelling. But, yeah, there's always a but, isn't there?
Oh.
What are the catches, the limitations we need to be aware of?
Yeah, you're right to ask. It's not magic. There are trade-offs. First big one, performance. You'll usually see a performance hit compared to running natively on the desktop. Browsers just add overhead.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? Second, not every single Python library will work. Pure Python ones, generally okay. But libraries that rely heavily on C extensions, things like that, they might need swapping out or just removing.
Right, compatibility issues.
And third, your game code needs to follow certain rules to work properly with Pygbag. It's much easier if you plan for this from the start. Converting an existing complex game, that can take some extra work, some refactoring.
Good to know. So let's say we're starting a new project. We're ready to refactor. What are these essential rules? I heard something about the main script file.
Absolutely. Rule number one, the big one. Your main game script must be called main.y.
Main.py. Got it.
And it has to be right there in the root folder of your game project. Pygbag looks for that specific file as the starting point, kind of like index.html for a website.
Makes sense. The entry point. What about dependencies? Libraries like pgames itself, or maybe NumPy if you use it. How does Pygbag know to include those?
Good question. You need to add what's called a PEP723 block right at the top of your main.py.
PEP 723.
Yeah, it's a standard way to list project dependencies inside the script itself. So you'd list things like Pyggames and NumPy, any other non-standard libraries your game needs. Pygbag reads that block and automatically fetches them when building the web version.
But not standard libraries, like random or math.
No, you don't need to list those. Pygbag includes a curated set of standard libraries already. The PEP723 block is just for the extras.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that browsers run on a single thread. That sounds like it would fundamentally change how we structure the game loop, doesn't it? Desktop games often just run flat out.
It absolutely does. And this is maybe the most crucial concept for web compatibility with Pygbag. Your main game function, the one that contains your game loop, it must be defined using async.
Async, like asynchronous programming.
Exactly. And inside that main loop, on every single frame, you must have this line, await asyncio.sleep 0.
Await asyncio.sleep 0.
Sleep for 0 seconds. That sounds weird. Why?
It does sound weird, but it's essential because the browser has only one main thread for everything, rendering the page, handling clicks, running your game's code. If your game loop just runs continuously without yielding, it freezes the entire browser tab.
Ah.
That await asyncio.sleep 0 tells Python's asyncio system, okay, I'm done with this tiny bit of work for this frame. Let the browser do other things for a moment. It yields control back.
So it prevents the game from hogging the single thread, keeps the browser responsive.
Precisely. And then to start your whole game, you call that main async function using asyncio.run. So async def main on, and then asyncio.run main.
Got it. Async function, await asyncio.sleep 0 in the loop, and asyncio.run to start. That's a big mental shift from typical Pygame loops.
It really is. But it's fundamental for making things work smoothly in the browser environment. Okay, so we've got the async loops sorted. What about assets? Images, sounds, fonts. Are there web-specific rules there too?
Yep. Asset management needs a little care. Paths first.
Yeah.
Always use forward slashes, not backslashes, even if you're developing on Windows. Web servers expect forward slashes.
Right. Consistency for paths.
Also file names. Avoid special characters. And crucially, be mindful of case sensitivity. Image.png is different from image.png on many web servers.
Good point. Easy mistake to make. What about file formats? Especially audio, that's often tricky on the web.
Audio is a big one. For Pygbag web builds, you must use OGG format for your sound files.
Only OGG. No WAV, no MP3.
Correct. WAV, MP3, M4A, AIFF, they are not supported for the web build process with Pygbag. It's an OGG-only world for sound effects and music.
Okay, OGG it is. What about images?
For images, stick to efficient formats. PNG is great, especially for transparency. WBP is also very good, very web-friendly. JPG is fine for photographic stuff. Try to avoid heavy formats like BMP.
And you mentioned something about when to load assets.
Yes, this is a really practical tip. Load all your assets right at the beginning of your main.py script. Don't try to load them dynamically halfway through the game or inside other modules you import.
Why is that?
It just tends to cause fewer problems in the browser environment. Loading everything up front makes things more predictable and avoids potential issues with how the browser handles file access mid-game.
Load early, load often. Well, load early, load once.
Any other performance tips for the web version, making it run smoother?
Yeah, definitely. First, consider using lower internal resolutions for your game surface. The browser will scale it up, often quite efficiently. High-res rendering can be demanding.
Lower res, let the browser scale.
Got it. Second, prefer color keying over alpha transparency if you can.
Color keying. That's
Yep.
where you pick one color, like bright pink, and make it totally transparent.
Exactly, as opposed to alpha transparency, which allows for partial transparency. Color keying is just computationally cheaper for the browser to handle, so it can lead to better performance, especially with lots of sprites. Interesting. Okay.
Third, pre-render things where possible. Like if you have a static background made of tiles, draw it once to an off-screen surface instead of redrawing every tile every frame.
Pre-baking assets, essentially.
Kinda, yeah. And maybe a bit counterintuitive. Aim for a higher frame rate on desktop during development. Maybe, say, 180 FPS if you're targeting 60 FPS on the web. It just gives you more headroom.
Right. Helps ensure the core logic is fast enough.
And finally, this one's surprisingly impactful. Remove all your print statements. Seriously, printing to the browser's console is really slow and can drag down performance noticeably.
Wow, okay. Get rid of the prints. That's a huge tip.
Yeah.
So we're tailoring code, managing assets. How do we actually know within the code if we're running in the browser versus on the desktop? For things that need to be different, like saving data.
Yeah, that's where sys.platform comes in handy again. You can check if sys.platform equals mscripten.
Mscripted with that.
Mscripten is the compiler toolchain that Pygbag uses under the hood to convert the Python code and libraries into something browsers understand, like WebAssembly. So if sys.platform is Mscripten, you know your code is running inside that browser environment.
Okay, so if sys.platform is Mscripten, lets you branch your code. Useful for .saving. How does saving work if there's no regular file system?
Exactly. For saving progress, high scores, things like that in the browser, you use the browser's built-in local storage. Pygbag gives you access to it via platform.window.local storage.
Platform.window.local storage.
Yeah, you can use .setItem, key, value, to store strings, and .getItem key to get them back. It persists even if the user closes the browser tab and comes back later.
And you'd wrap that in the ifsys.platform equals script.check, presumably.
Absolutely, because local storage only exists in the browser. For desktop builds, you'd use standard file saving methods.
Makes sense. What about visuals? Sometimes pixel art games look blurry when scaled up by a browser. Any way to fix that?
Yes. There's a specific CSS property you can set via Pygbag. It's platform.window.canvas.style.imagerendering equals pixelated. Image rendering pixelated. Yep. That tells the browser, hey, when you scale this game canvas up, use nearest neighbor interpolation. Don't try to smooth it out. Keeps those pixels sharp and crisp. Really important for retro-style games.
Neat trick.
Yeah.
Okay, switching gears to mobile again. How do things like taps and maybe device tilting work?
So a single tap is automatically treated like a left mouse click by Pygame, which is convenient. Pyggame also supports multi-touch, so you can track multiple fingers if you need to code specific gestures like pinching or swiping.
And tilting, like using the accelerometer.
Yeah, for gyroscope and accelerometer data, you need to work with the window.device orientation event. Pygbag helps expose this. But a heads up, this usually only works reliably on Android devices using Chromium-based browsers like Chrome itself. iOS and other browsers have different implementations or restrictions.
Okay. So mobile motion controls are possible, but might be Android Chrome specific for now. Good to know. What about Python modules? You said Pygbag doesn't bundle the entire standard library.
Right. It includes a subset to keep the download size small. If you need a standard library module that's not included or any third-party library, you generally just need to place the .py file or the libraries folder alongside your main.py.
Just put the files there.
Yeah, Pygbag will try to bundle them up. The nuance comes with binary modules like NumPy that have compiled C code. Those must be compatible with the specific Python version Pygbag is using internally for the web build.
Which might not be the same Python version I have installed locally.
Exactly. Pygbag bundles a specific Python runtime version, like, say, Python 3.11, to run in the browser. If you built NumPy locally with Python 3.10, it might not work. So there's a version compatibility thing to watch out for with binary extensions.
Okay, that's a subtle but important point. So let's say we've navigated all these rules, our game seems ready. How do we actually test this web version locally before putting it online?
Good practice is always test on desktop first. Make sure the game logic itself works.
Right.
Then open your terminal or command prompt, go into your game's main folder, the one with main.py, and just run python-m pygbag. The dot means this current directory.
Python-m pygbag.
Might be Python 3 or Py, depending on your system setup. It will then start a little local web server.
And how do I see the game?
Just open your web browser and go to localhost 0.800. You should see a loading screen, and then hopefully your game.
Okay, localhost 0.8000. What if I just see a black screen? Or nothing happens after it says ready to start?
Yeah.
Debugging web stuff can be painful.
It can be, but Pygbag has a built-in trick. If it hangs or looks wrong, go back to the URL in your browser and add a #debug to the end. So localhost 0.8000 #debug.
Yeah, #debug. What does that do?
It tells Pygbag to output any errors or tracebacks directly into the terminal window where you ran the python-m pygbag command. Super helpful for figuring out what went wrong.
Ah, that's useful. Instead of digging through browser developer tools, maybe.
Exactly. It often points you right to the Python error. And sometimes the issues are subtle, like I heard about one developer whose layout was all messed up only in the web version. Turned out Pygbag was reporting slightly different screen dimensions than the desktop version, requiring specific adjustments just for the web build. Those little differences can catch you out.
Yeah, classic works on my machine, but slightly different elsewhere. Okay, debugged, looking good locally. How do we share it? Get it on, say, itch.io.
Pygbag makes the deployment part pretty easy. When you run the build process, it creates a build web folder in your project.
Build web.
Inside that folder is everything needed to run the game online. The index.html, the compiled code, assets, everything. For itch.io, you just need to zip up the contents of that web folder, not the folder itself, but everything inside it.
Zip the contents.
Then you upload that zip file to itch.io, and crucially, tell itch that it's an HTML game that should be played in the browser. It handles the rest.
That sounds surprisingly simple.
It really is quite streamlined for platforms like itch.
What about making it feel even more integrated, like an app someone can install from the browser? You mentioned progressive web apps, PWAs.
Yeah, PWAs are cool for that. To make your Pygbag game a PWA, first you need to host the contents of that build web folder somewhere accessible online. GitHub Pages is a really popular free option.
Okay, upload the web folder contents to a GitHub repo, turn on GitHub Pages.
Right. Now your game has a public URL. Then you need to create a small text file called manifest.json.
Manifest.json.
Inside that file, you put basic info, your game's name, a shorter name, the starting URL, which is usually just, and you link to an icon file, like a PNG.
App name, short name, start URL, icon. Got it.
Then you just add a link to that manifest.json file inside the head section of the index.html file that Pygbag generated.
Link the manifest in the HTML. And then how does someone install it?
Once that's all set up and hosted, modern browsers will often detect the manifest. On desktop Chrome, you might see a little install icon appear in the address bar. On Android Chrome, it often prompts Add to Home Screen either automatically or through the browser menu.
So the browser handles the install prompt.
Mostly, yeah. The experience can vary a bit between browsers and operating systems. iOS PWA support, for instance, has had some changes recently, so it might need a bit more specific checking to ensure it works smoothly there.
Okay, so PWAs are an option for that installable feel, and you could even get it onto the Google Play Store.
Yeah, there are tools like pwabuilder.com. It's a Microsoft project, actually. You can point it at your hosted PWA, and it helps package it up into the format needed for the Google Play Store, even handling things like generating signed application packages.
Interesting. So you can go from Pygame code to the Play Store via the web route.
It's definitely a viable path now.
We've covered a ton, from the basics to publishing. Are there any, advanced tips or quirks people run into when they really get deep into Pygbag?
One thing that sometimes surprises people is that the game doesn't start playing sound immediately when the page loads.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Browsers have policies against websites auto-playing audio without any user interaction first. Imagine visiting 10 sites and they all start blasting sound.
Right, that would be annoying.
So Pygbag respects that. Usually the first click or key press inside the game window enables the audio, but if you absolutely need it to start immediately, maybe for a kiosk display or something, there's a command line flag, block a zero, you can add when you run Pygbag. It overrides that block.
Blocks zeros, okay. Use with caution, I guess. What about sound quality? Any issues there?
With older versions of Pygbag, say, before 0.1.5, some people did report occasional sound distortion or crackling. It was related to how SDL2's audio, which Pygame uses, interacts with the browser's less predictable timing. The strong advice now is just make sure you're using Pygbag 1.5 or later, as a lot of improvements were made to the audio handling. If you hit really stubborn issues, maybe look into an external JavaScript sound library. But usually, updating Pygbag fixes it.
Good tip. Keep Pygbag updated. Can you interact with the user's file system at all? Like letting them load a save file or download something the game generates?
You can. Browsers are sandboxed, so you can't just root random files. But Pygbag provides ways. There's event-based file uploading, so the user clicks a button, chooses a file, and your game gets notified and can access the data.
Okay, user-initiated uploads.
And for downloading, you can use platform.window.mm.download in your Python code. If your game generates a file, like maybe a saved level or a screenshot, within the browser's temporary space, that function triggers a standard browser download prompt for the user.
Cool. So controlled uploads and downloads are possible. Any visual tricks?
Yeah, you can customize the HTML page around the game canvas. Change the background color, for example. Or you could even use chroma keying, making a specific color in your Pygame window transparent, so you could potentially overlay your game onto parts of the web page, maybe showing a loading bar directly on the page behind the game canvas.
Interesting integration possibilities. And just a small branding thing, the little icon in the browser tab.
Oh, the favicon. Super easy. Just put a file named favicon.png in the root directory of your game alongside main.py. Pygbag will automatically find it and use it for the web build. Nice little touch.
Favicon.png in the root. Simple enough. So let's try and wrap this up. Looking back at everything, what's the big picture here? What does Pygbag really unlock for Pygame developers?
I mean, the biggest thing is just breaking down those distribution barriers, taking a game that might have been stuck on one person's desktop or maybe shared awkwardly between friends with the right setup and making it instantly accessible to almost anyone with a web browser.
Yeah, that shift from wrestling with installers and dependencies to just sharing a link, it feels huge.
It really is. It changes how you think about getting your game out there.
Yeah.
And technically, it's fascinating, too. Pygbag uses mscripton to compile Python's C code into WebAssembly.
Right, WebAssembly for speed in the browser.
And it relies heavily on Asyncio, Python's async framework, to handle that single-threaded browser environment we talked about with await asyncio.sleep0. It's this combination that makes Python a genuinely practical choice for developing games that run right in the browser.
It's not just packaging, it's enabling Python for the browser in a powerful way.
Exactly. It opens up so many possibilities.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? With distribution becoming this easy, just a URL, bypassing app stores, no platform builds, how might that change the landscape for indie games? What kind of new, maybe simpler, or maybe just different kinds of interactive experiences could we see popping up on the web now that making them and sharing them is, well, this much more straightforward?
That's a great question to ponder. It definitely lowers the barrier to entry for sharing creative work.